So picture the smoke rising over Jerusalem. The year is 614 AD, and the Eastern Roman Empire, which is arguably the most sophisticated, structurally advanced superpower on the planet at that time, has just been absolutely shattered.
Completely dismantled.
Right. The Persian army hasn't just breached the walls. They have, decimated the Roman forces. They've taken the city. And in this massive blow that strikes at the absolute core of the Roman identity, they've captured the true cross.
Yeah, the psychological damage of that alone is massive.
Oh, totally. I mean, panic is rippling all the way back to Constantinople. To the naked eye, the Roman Empire is just, well, they're completely bankrupt, militarily devastated, structurally finished.
It is basically the geopolitical equivalent of a total systemic collapse, the ultimate black swan event of late antiquity.
Exactly. And usually when we look at an ancient text that makes a prediction about a massive crisis like this, tradition treats it as a magic trick.
Right, the classic prophecy narrative.
Yeah, you know the setup. A prophet looks into a metaphorical crystal ball, the fog clears, and some mystical voice just announces what's going to happen next. It requires zero intellectual effort from us. We just sit back, marvel at the supernatural foresight, and move on.
Which, that is entirely disconnected from reality. It treats history as this stage for divine whims, rather than, a laboratory of actual cause and effect.
But today, we are stepping into a radically different analytical landscape. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a sledgehammer to the whole myth of prophecy mysticism.
It's going to be a fun one.
It really is. We have this absolutely fascinating stack of sources in front of us, and it's anchored by a deeply analytical lecture delivered in August 1979. This lecture takes a foundational 7th century text, specifically the opening 16 verses of Surah Ar-Rum, and examines it through the lens of a thinker named Ghulam Ahmad Parvez. And let me tell you, this is not a theological sermon.
Not at all. What makes Parvez's analysis so striking is his complete refusal to indulge in any religious sentimentality. He just strips away all the theological paint to reveal the raw socioeconomic scaffolding underneath.
Right. So we're not looking at this like some religious fairy tale. We're looking at this text the way a master sociologist or like a systems engineer would.
Exactly.
We're going to investigate how to read the actual balance sheet of an empire. We're going to learn how to spot the hidden microscopic structural rot inside a society, and, how to predict a civilizational collapse or miraculous recovery based entirely on immutable mathematical laws of human behavior.
Because the core premise we are exploring today is that the text is identifying which side of a conflict is aligned with productive structural principles and which side isn't. And it's projecting forward from that baseline data.
Okay, so to really make sense of this analysis, we have to understand the geopolitical game board these people were actually looking at. Let's travel back to that window of 602 to 600 AD. What does the macro dynamic of the world look like at this exact moment?
Yeah. Well, the global stage at that time is essentially a bipolar world. It's divided between two absolute megapowers locked in this grueling, multi-generational conflict.
The heavyweights.
Right. So on one side, you have the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Romans. From a sociological standpoint, they represent a society built on codified text. They are Christian, they have a structured legal framework, and their society is organized around a unifying, invisible moral law.
All right. And on the other side?
You have the Sassanid Empire. The Persians, they are Zoroastrian, they're characterized by fire worship, and in the socio-political categorization of that specific era, they fall into the camp of polytheists.
Okay.
Their system, at least from the perspective of our source material, is heavily reliant on physical elements and a very extractive might makes right hierarchy. It's not based on a codified, universally applied textual law.
So they are essentially the U.S. and the Soviet Union as the 7th century.
Basically.
Two completely different worldviews fighting for total dominance. And as we mentioned at the top, right around 614 AD, the market completely crashes for the Romans.
The bottom falls out.
Right. The Persians go on this unprecedented massive offensive. They sweep through Syria, they take Egypt, they capture Jerusalem, they take the True Cross.
And the psychological blow to the Romans there just cannot be overstated. Their entire defensive structure appears to be totally annihilated.
So the Romans are down for the count. But here is where it gets really interesting for me, because the ripple effects of this superpower clash, they hit a place that seems, frankly, entirely irrelevant to global geopolitics. Mecca. I want to pause here because this confused me at first. Mecca is not an empire.
No, not at all.
They don't have a standing army that can compete with the Romans or the Persians. They are essentially this tiny collection of tribes running a mercantile economy based on, pilgrimage to local idols.
Mm.
So why do they care? Why does a geopolitical war thousands of miles away matter to them?
Because of proxy identities, it's ideological. The Meccan elite, who are running an extractive polytheistic system, align themselves philosophically with the victorious Persians.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because both systems rely on physical, tangible elements, whether it's fire for the Persians or stone idols for the Meccans, and both operate on a strict hierarchy of extraction without any unifying textual, law-enforcing equality.
Ah, okay. So it's pure ideological tribalism.
Exactly. And on the other side of this local Meccan divide, you have a tiny, heavily persecuted group of early Muslims. And philosophically, they align with the Romans.
Because of the book.
Right. Both are monotheistic, both believe in an unseen God, and most importantly, both believe society must be governed by a codified, written, moral law. So when the news hits Mecca that the Romans have been utterly destroyed, the Meccan elite throw massive celebrations. They are ecstatic.
They completely weaponize the news. The sources note that the Meccans start taunting this small Muslim faction.
Yeah.
They're essentially saying, like, look at your Roman friends. They have the book, they have the structured law, and they just got obliterated by the Persians. Your system is a complete failure.
Right. Our system, the extractive, polytheistic, might makes right system, is clearly the superior model.
But let me push back on that Meccan logic for a second. Because if you think about it, this is such a universally human flaw. It's exactly like watching amateur day traders cheering a sudden stock market crash.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. Imagine you have a really solid tech company. They have great fundamentals, amazing unit economics, a strong underlying engineering team. But they suffer like a severe supply chain shock. A factory burns down. Their stock price plummets 60% in a week.
The surface metrics look absolutely disastrous.
Disastrous. And the day traders, who have absolutely no idea how to read a balance sheet, they start screaming on social media, the company is dead, the business model is a fraud, my meme coin is the future of finance.
Yeah, they're cheering the crash without looking at the company's structural fundamentals.
Exactly. Parwaz argues the Meccans are experiencing the tyranny of unproven assertions. They are assuming a temporary market fluctuation is an immutable law of physics.
That is a perfect way to frame it. They are confusing the weather with the climate. The Persians definitely had a surge of highly organized, immediate military output. They had the numbers, they had the momentum. But the Meccans failed to ask the crucial systems engineering question.
Which is?
Did the Persians actually destroy the underlying structural capacity of the Roman Empire to regenerate? Or did they just win a devastating series of battles?
Right. Which brings us directly into the linguistic deep dives of the text itself, Surah Ar-Rum. How does this text, which is being formulated in the middle of this tiny, mocked, isolated community, respond to all these Meccan taunts? It doesn't respond with emotional poetry.
No.
It doesn't say, well, our God is bigger and he will magically fix this.
Not at all. It issues a highly specific, measurable counterforecast. And Parwaz's analysis insists that this forecast is based entirely on structural laws, not supernatural intervention.
Let's look at the exact phrasing here because it's so direct. The text opens with a straightforward situation report. The Romans have been defeated in the neighboring land, acknowledges the data, but then it issues the forecast. But after their defeat, they will be victorious. And it gives a hard timeline.
Yeah, the Arabic phrase used in the text is bidi sin.
Unpack bidi sinin for us, because this is where the whole mysticism argument really falls apart.
Right. So in classical Arabic, bidi refers to a specific numerical window. It means a period of 3 to 9 years. It is not some vague, mystical, someday in the distant future kind of thing.
It's not at the end of times.
Exactly. It has a hard, measurable deadline. The text is planting a flag in the ground and stating publicly, within a maximum of 9 years, the Romans will reverse this macroeconomic and military trend.
And this is the absolute crux of Parwaz's thesis. He argues that the law of history does not operate on human emotion. It does not operate on the capricious whims of a deity playing favorites, like deciding to rescue the Romans just because they asked nicely.
Right, it operates on measurable structural dynamics. The Sassanids won the immediate battles because they had superior organization and force projection in that specific moment. That is a natural law.
But the text is performing a deeper analysis.
Yes. It is essentially auditing the structural balance sheet of the Romans and concluding their underlying systemic capacity has not been permanently destroyed. They still possess the administrative framework, the human capital, and the geographic depth to reorganize, produce resources, and mount a counteroffensive.
It's the analyst looking at that battered tech company and saying, yes, the stock is down 60%. But look at their patents. Look at their supply chain infrastructure that survived. Give them 3 to 9 years, like 1 or 2 business cycles, and they will bounce back.
Exactly.
And the historical payoff is wild. Because right in that exact 3 to 9 year window, around 623 or 624 AD, the Roman Emperor Heraclius does the impossible.
He launches a massive, structurally sound counteroffensive.
But how? I mean, how does a bankrupt empire just bounce back?
Yeah.
Because if we were talking about structural laws, it can't just be magic. They didn't just spawn a new army out of thin air.
It definitely wasn't magic. Heraclius had to fundamentally reorganize the Roman economy. He actually utilized the immense wealth stored in the church to fund the military.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, essentially liquidating dead capital to create immediate liquidity. He restructured the provincial administration, and tactically, he bypassed the Persian front lines in Anatolia and struck directly at the Persian heartland, targeting their own structural vulnerabilities.
So he fixed the internal accounting system and then exploited the enemy's overextension. And it worked. He completely turned the tide of the war. But the source highlights a dual payoff here, right?
It does.
Because it wasn't just the Romans bouncing back. At the exact same time, literally in the same year, that tiny mock Muslim faction in Mecca, well, who had actually been pushed to the brink of extinction by then and forced to flee to Medina.
They achieve an impossible victory of their own.
The Battle of Badr. 313 highly organized but poorly equipped individuals utterly defeat the heavily armed elite military force of the Meccan oligarchy.
And this is where we have to really synthesize what the text was actually claiming about the nature of success. Traditional readings look at the Roman comeback and the victory at Badr and say, well, God likes these two groups, so he did magic tricks for them.
Right.
But Parwes radically redefines the concept of divine help, which in the text is called Nusrat.
Yes, the analysis spends a lot of time on Nusrat. And if it's not a magic spell, what is it?
Nusrat is the inevitable cause and effect result of a system aligning itself with productive, law-abiding principles. Think of it as kinetic energy. The Romans finally aligned their vast imperial structure with efficient organization, liquidity, and discipline under Heraclius.
And the early Muslims?
The early Muslims in Medina aligned their tiny micro-society with absolute internal cohesion, resource sharing, and a shared moral law.
So when a system aligns with the immutable laws of nature, when it organizes efficiently and stops wasting energy, it generates extreme power. That generated power is what the text calls Nusrat. It's not favor, it's physics.
Which means anyone, any civilization that aligns its structure with these laws can achieve that power.
Okay, so if history is just a legible balance sheet, why did the Meccans get the forecast so incredibly wrong? Which leads us into what Parwes calls the engine of reason.
They got it wrong because they were looking at the completely wrong layer of reality. Parwes unpacks verses 6 and 7 of the text, which draw a razor-sharp distinction between two types of observers in the world. The text makes a very provocative, almost blunt statement. Most people do not know.
I love how the analysis clarifies this, because it's not that most people don't know because the truth is hidden in some secret vault, or like because they aren't initiated into a cult. The data is literally right in front of them.
Right. They don't know because they are, to use a modern framework, surface readers. They are completely trapped in the layer of reality the text calls Zahir.
Let's define Zahir for the listener, because this is a foundational concept for the rest of our deep dive. Zahir is the immediate physical appearance of the world. It is the raw sensory data right in front of your face.
Yeah, in the context of a civilization or an empire, the Zahir is the military hardware. It is the amount of gold sitting in the treasury. It is the immediate quarterly profits, the temporary wealth, the immediate wins and losses on the battlefield.
And the Meccans were absolute masters of the Zahir. They looked at the Persians, they saw these massive armies, they saw the immediate capture of Jerusalem, they saw vast amounts of looted Roman wealth flowing back to the Sassanid capital, and they concluded, this is the superior system. This is the winning horse.
But the text contrasts Zahir with a much deeper, far more consequential concept, the Akira. And this is where Parwes introduces a massive paradigm shift.
It really is. Because if you have any familiarity with traditional theology, Akira is translated almost exclusively as the afterlife, the ethereal world beyond death. You do good things here, you get a reward in the Akira.
Exactly. But Parwes' sociological analysis strips that narrow theological definition away. He argues that the Quranic concept of akira is fundamentally a systems engineering term.
Break that down for us. How does Akira function sociologically?
Well, akira is the underlying principle. It is the long-term, consequential depth layer of how systems function over time. It is the ultimate, inevitable outcome of a process. If Zahir is the immediate action, the surface ripple akira is the delayed, inevitable structural reaction.
This clicked for me when I applied it back to that tech startup analogy we used earlier. I like the startup analogy, but let's push it further, because it's not just about a temporary stock crash. Let's look at a company that is currently booming.
Okay, set the scene.
Think about one of those wildly hyped Silicon Valley unicorns. The Zahir of that startup is blindingly bright. They have a state-of-the-art office in San Francisco. They have incredible PR hype. They just raised a $1 billion Series C round. The founder's doing TED Talks. The surface metrics, the Zahir, are completely off the charts. If you're a surface reader, you look at that and say, this company's going to rule the world.
But you are ignoring the akira.
Exactly.
Mhm.
I want to know the Akira. I want to know the actual business model. I want to look at the unit economics. Does it actually cost them $100 to acquire a customer who will only ever generate $50 in revenue?
Mhm.
Is the core product actually viable, or are they just subsidizing growth with venture capital cash? Are the founders honest, or is the internal culture deeply toxic and extractive?
Right. The Zahir is the hype. The akira is the inevitable financial reality that will crush them 3 years down the line when the venture funding dries up.
And Parwez argues that the Roman-Persian War was essentially a global stress test to see which reading of reality accurately predicts the future. The text was warning the Meccans, like, you are betting your entire identity on the Zahir of the Persian Empire. You see their gold in their captured cities, but you are ignoring the Akira, the underlying structural instability of an empire built entirely on violent extraction, slavery, and coercion.
Because a system built purely on extraction can generate massive immediate power, sure, but it continuously degrades its own foundation. It burns its own fuel to look bright.
So if analyzing the Akira, the underlying laws of consequence, is how you predict success and recovery, how do you predict civilizational collapse? Because the source material goes incredibly deep into the autopsy of fallen empires.
It really does. In verses 9 and 10 of Surah Ar-Rum, the text issues a direct invitation to the Meccans, and by extension to us. It says, go look at the ruins. The Meccans were merchants. They ran caravans up to Syria and down to Yemen. They literally walked their camels past the shattered colossal remnants of prior mega-civilizations every single season.
The text points out something fascinating here. It says these past nations cultivated more land, they extracted more wealth. They literally mined more gold from the earth, and they possessed significantly greater physical power than the Meccans ever did.
Right. The Meccans were relatively impoverished compared to these ancient titans, and yet those titans, with all their wealth and architectural marvels, are now just dust blowing through ruined pillars. So the analytical question the text poses is, why did they fall?
Right. If they had all the Zahir, if they had the maximum possible surface metrics of success, what was the microscopic structural rot in their Akir that brought them down?
Parwez identifies the disease. He points to a specific dynamic called Nahamwarian.
Nahamwarian. It translates roughly to inequality or severe disparity.
But we need to be very precise here. It's not just casual, accidental inequality. It is structural requital, the law of requital, or mukafat amal. These mega-civilizations were incredibly smart. They knew how to build highly productive systems. They mastered agriculture, metallurgy, logistics. But they introduced systemic class disparities into the very engine of their production.
They rigged the game.
They created a societal structure where the massive wealth generated by the working majority was siphoned off and hoarded by a tiny, insulated elite.
And this brings us to one of the most brilliant and honestly most controversial economic critiques in Parwez's analysis. He dives into the illusion of the fair wage. The text argues that destructive extractive systems operate entirely on the concept of muaza, which means a wage or compensation.
Now, to a modern ear, fighting for a fair wage seems like the ultimate goal of labor rights.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here, because if you're listening to this and you come from a modern free market capitalist background, the idea of a wage being inherently destructive sounds a lot like 19th century Marxism. A modern capitalist would argue that a wage is a mutually agreed upon voluntary contract. I agree to pay you $20 for an hour of your labor. How is Parwez, or the text itself, defining that as a structural disease?
That is the exact right question to ask, and it's vital we view this neutrally, purely as the analytical framework Parwez is presenting. He is not coming at this from a Marxist perspective at all. He's looking through a 7th century structural lens of absolute equilibrium.
Okay, so how does he frame it?
Parwez argues that the trap of the wage system, the muaza, is the inherent power imbalance. In an extractive system, one class, the ruling elite, the capital owners, the emperors, gets to unilaterally determine the wage of the laboring class.
And because they hold the monopoly on power or resources, the worker has no real choice but to accept it.
Exactly. And by definition, in order for the elite to accumulate massive surplus wealth, that wage will always, mathematically, be less than the actual value the worker produced. The ruling class extracts the surplus. Parwez points out that the Quranic model argues a true, structurally aligned, permanent system does not deal in wages. It demands that the worker receives the actual mahazal.
The mahazal, the product, the actual full result of their labor.
The full value. When you siphon that surplus away to build palaces while the laborer starves, you are introducing a fault line into your civilization's akira.
The linguistic root Parwez brings up to illustrate this is chilling. He looks at the classical Arabic word for crime, which is jurm.
Yes. This detail completely reframes how we think about morality.
What did jurm originally mean to the desert Arabs? It didn't mean breaking a speed limit or jaywalking. It literally meant cutting the fruit from someone else's branch.
Imagine the sociology of that. You plant the tree. You haul water from the well every day. You prune the branches. You protect it from pests. And right when it finally bears ripe fruit, someone else, someone with a bigger sword, comes along, cuts the fruit down, and takes it to their own house. And maybe they throw you a few dates as a wage for your trouble.
That is the foundational definition of a crime: siphoning the product of someone else's labor. And Parwez's argument is that when a civilization builds its entire economic engine on germ, cutting other people's fruit, calling it a fair wage, and hoarding the surplus, that civilization is mathematically doomed by the law of requital.
Because actions have structural consequences. You cannot cheat the math of human survival. The analysis uses a brilliant Finkel analogy here to explain exactly why this hoarding of wealth eventually destroys the very system that created it: the boat and the water.
I love this analogy. Let's really lay this out because it makes the abstract economics completely visceral. Wealth in a society is like water for a boat. What is the fundamental relationship between a boat and the water it sits in?
Well, the boat absolutely needs the water to survive. It cannot fulfill its purpose without it. As long as the boat is above the water, meaning the wealth is properly managed, flowing externally, distributed equitably around the hull, the water is the very medium that allows the boat to sail perfectly. It provides buoyancy, it facilitates progress and trade.
But what happens if the people inside the boat look at that water and succumb to greed? What if they say, wow, this water is so valuable, it makes us move, it gives us power. I want to keep it all for myself. I want it inside the boat with me.
The moment you start hoarding the water, the moment the water breaches the hull and starts filling up the inside of the boat, the dynamic instantly flips.
The exact same element that was supposed to keep the civilization afloat
Becomes the exact weight that drags it to the bottom of the ocean.
It is a flawless physical representation of extreme economic concentration. When a small elite hoards the resources, creating that Nahamwarian, they are literally pouring water into the hull of their own civilization. They think they are enriching themselves, building massive treasuries and estates, but structurally they are triggering the physical laws of their own drowning.
The Zahir looks like immense wealth. The Akira is a sunken ship. The mega-civilizations of the past sank because their internal hull was filled with hoarded wealth while the people outside starved.
So we know exactly why extractive systems collapse. We have seen the autopsy. The vital question then becomes, what does a perfectly aligned productive system look like in practice? How do you actually keep the water outside the boat?
You have to build a society with a fully internalized accounting system. And Parwez highlights a stunning historical case study of this happening in real time right after the geopolitical events we started this deep dive with.
We are moving a few years forward now. The early Muslims, who started as that tiny, persecuted, mocked group in Mecca, have now grown into a formidable, highly organized, structurally sound society centered in Medina. And eventually they clash with and completely conquer the Persian Sasanian Empire.
The geopolitical map is totally redrawn. The Arabs, a people who, just a generation prior, were historically impoverished, living in a harsh, unforgiving desert environment, literally surviving on ground date pits and camel milk, suddenly find themselves in absolute control of the accumulated wealth of the thousands of years old empire.
We're talking about the Persian loot. Unimaginable wealth, mountains of gold, jewels, silver, centuries of hoarded imperial treasures. Now, by the normal laws of human greed and military conquest, this is the exact moment the victorious army devolves into absolute chaos. It's when the looting starts, discipline breaks down, and everyone tries to grab as much water for their own boat as possible.
Because usually the zahir of that much wealth is too blinding for human psychology to resist. But Parwaz details the reaction of the caliph in Medina, Umar. The commander of the Muslim forces in Persia writes a letter back to Umar in the capital. And this veteran commander is marveling not at the sheer volume of the wealth they have captured, but at the inexplicable behavior of his own troops.
He writes that his soldiers are scattered across vast, newly conquered territories. We're talking about thousands of miles. There are no fast communication lines. There is no central oversight. There are no military police watching their every move. They're surrounded by literal fortunes. And yet, the commander reports that not a single soldier stole a single needle.
It's unbelievable.
Every single piece of that immense wealth was meticulously cataloged and surrendered intact to the central treasury to be distributed according to the law.
When Umar reads this letter in Medina, the historical record notes that he wept. And Parwaz argues that it wasn't just tears of relief or joy, it was a profound, systems-level realization. Someone standing next to Umar asks why he is crying. And Umar explains the underlying mechanism of what has just happened. He recognized that this astonishing display of mass integrity across thousands of miles wasn't some magical, spontaneous outbreak of morality.
Right. It wasn't a supernatural intervention.
It was the cascading effect of absolute structural integrity at the very top. Umar said, essentially, the soldiers are honest because the head of the state is honest.
Well, let's dig into that, because I want to make sure I understand this and that you at home are tracking with this. How does top-down honesty actually enforce behavior mechanically? You're telling me thousands of young guys, far from home, staring at gold, just decided to be honest because their leader back in Medina was an honest guy. Human nature doesn't usually work like that.
It doesn't work like that if the accountability is purely external, if they are just afraid of the police. But Parwaz's analysis points out that Umar had established a system devoid of germ. The leadership did not cut the fruit from the citizens' branches. When the leadership lives exactly like the common soldier, when there is zero extraction happening at the top, it fundamentally rewrites the psychological baseline of the entire group.
It changes the culture.
It creates a dialectric of honesty. The individuals fully internalize the system's alignment. They realize that stealing the Persian gold isn't just a sin, it is structurally damaging the very system that protects them.
They realize they would be pouring water into their own boat. And Parwaz gives an incredible micro example to contrast with that macro example of the army, the story of the milkmaid. This is such a powerful, intimate illustration of what an internalized accounting system actually looks like in the dark, when the zahir of authority is totally absent.
Walk us through the scenario.
So it's the middle of the night in Medina. A mother and her teenage daughter are preparing milk to sell in the market the next morning. The mother tells her daughter, put some water in the milk. Dilute it. Cheat the market a little bit to increase their profit margin.
A very common, very human economic temptation, especially for people who are likely living on the margins. The zahir is that they make a few extra coins to survive.
And the mother rationalizes it by saying, the caliph, Umar, isn't looking. The state market inspectors aren't here. She is operating entirely on external accountability. She only obeys the law if the enforcer is physically present in the room with a stick.
But the daughter refuses to do it.
The daughter says, the caliph might not be looking, but the law is always looking. And by the law, she means the underlying akira, the structural truth of the universe, which in their terminology is God. She has completely internalized the accounting system. She understands that cheating the market introduces a microscopic fracture into the systemic integrity of their society.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the definition of a structurally invincible civilization. Think about the economic efficiency of this. When the citizens do not need external enforcement to maintain integrity, when the lowest-ranking soldiers surrounded by imperial gold and the poorest milkmaid in the dark both operate with flawless systemic honesty, your enforcement costs drop to zero.
That is wild to think about. Zero enforcement costs.
That society cannot be broken from the outside because it cannot be corrupted from the inside.
It's an impregnable akira. Which leads us to the ultimate question of Parwez's analysis. When a society actually achieves this level of structural integrity, when they eradicate germ, when they stop hoarding the water and instead distribute the resources perfectly, what is the ultimate result on the ground?
The emergence of the aesthetics of a perfected system, and this is where Parwez completely dismantles traditional religious theology and turns it into pure applied sociology. He redefines the absolute core concepts of Jannat and Jahannam, paradise and hell.
Traditionally, if you ask anyone on the street, these are viewed purely as afterlife destinations, places you go after you die, based on a cosmic tally of your good and bad deeds. You suffer here, but you get rewarded in Jannat later.
But Parwez strips that theological paint right off. According to his analysis of the Quranic text, Jahannam hell is not just a fiery pit waiting in the afterlife.
Right.
It is a highly specific sociological model. It is the earthly state of a society built on class disparities, where wealth is monopolized, where Nahumwarian is the operating system.
Right.
A society where the vast majority suffers, starves, and toils so a tiny elite can hoard the water. That socioeconomic reality is hell.
And conversely, Jannat Paradise is the sociological model of a balanced system. It is a society where resources are equally accessible, where the worker receives their full mahazal, their full product. It is a state of perfect, frictionless, socioeconomic equilibrium achieved right here in the physical world.
But, and this is a crucial distinction Parwez makes, this aligned society is not just about basic utilitarian survival. It is not a grim, centralized command economy where everyone gets their exact ration of gray porridge, wears a gray uniform, and goes to sleep.
No, the text is explicit about the abundance. The source points out the Arab fascination with flowing water and shaded green trees. Now, to a 7th century desert dweller, a shaded garden with a flowing stream is the ultimate zahir of success because it represents the ultimate escape from the brutal, burning scarcity of their immediate environment.
Right. But as the society system scales, as the structural integrity creates massive sustainable surpluses, like the wealth captured from the Persians, the society unlocks extreme aesthetics. The text doesn't shy away from this. It explicitly describes the hallmarks of this perfected Jannat society. Silk clothing, beautiful towering architecture, high culture, luxurious couches, exquisite jewelry.
And this leads to a profound linguistic and cultural point that Parwez makes about the function of art in a civilization. He looks at a specific classical Arabic root word used in the text to describe the state of the people who have achieved this perfected system. The word is habra, or huber.
This is where his analysis directly confronts and dismantles centuries of later puritanical interpretations.
Exactly. Over the centuries, certain highly puritanical readings of tradition have tried to outlaw the arts entirely. They claim that music is forbidden, that painting is forbidden, that beautiful aesthetics are a sinful distraction from austere piety.
But Parwez points out that the original Quranic text uses words derived from habra to describe the ultimate reward of a perfected society. And if you look up habra in classical Arabic dictionaries, what does it refer to?
It refers to the highest possible forms of aesthetics. It refers to visual splendor, to things that are breathtakingly beautiful to look at, what Parwez calls Jannah and Nega, the paradise of the eyes. And astonishingly, it explicitly refers to beautiful music, to auditory perfection, gosh, the paradise of the ears.
What's fascinating here is the sociological implication of that vocabulary. The text is arguing that fine arts, beautiful music, visual splendor, these are not sins, they are not decadent distractions. They are the ultimate measurable metrics of a civilization that has successfully transcended mere survival.
Think about the hierarchy of human needs. When you are starving in the desert, when your society is plagued by war and Nahumwarian, you don't have the time, the energy, or the resources to compose a symphony or paint a masterpiece. Your entire cognitive load is dedicated to finding water and not getting killed. But when your society achieves perfect structural integrity, when the resources flow freely and equitably, human beings are finally liberated.
Art becomes the proof of the system's perfection. It proves that the society has moved beyond the animalistic struggle for caloric resources and into a state of elevated human flourishing. The capacity to appreciate and create beauty requires what Parwez calls a refined sense, a sensory depth that is the true hallmark of a fully realized humanity.
So to claim that a perfected divine system would banish art and music is to fundamentally misunderstand the structural goal of the text. The text includes these aesthetics not as decadent luxuries, but as the inevitable, beautiful blossoming of a society that has finally aligned its akira.
It is the ultimate fusion of Zahir and Akira. The internal, microscopic structural perfection of the society manifests outwardly as undeniable, breathtaking beauty. The engine runs so perfectly that it produces art.
Okay, let's pull back and synthesize this incredible crash course.
Uh,
Because we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started with the burning of Jerusalem and the geopolitics of the Roman-Persian War. We moved through the socioeconomics of the wage versus the product, the psychological dialectic of top-down honesty, all the way to the sociological function of a symphony.
If we look at the grand thesis of Parwez's 1979 analysis of Surah Al-Rum, it is fundamentally an exploration of the relationship between permanence and change.
The surface of history, the Zahir, is always shifting. It is in constant, chaotic motion. Empires rise and fall. Tech bubbles inflate and burst. Markets crash. The Romans lose, then the Romans win. The Persians look invincible, then they are shattered.
But beneath that shifting, turbulent surface, the permanent principle is entirely constant. Historical outcomes perfectly, mathematically track structural alignment. Productive, honest systems that distribute wealth fairly, that operate on internalized accountability, and that refuse to commit the germ of stealing the fruit from the worker's branch, those systems will always, inevitably outlast extractive, self-deceiving systems built on inequality.
It is not about divine magic. It is not about supernatural interventions or crystal ball prophecies predicting dates out of thin air. It is about the cold, hard laws of socio-economic reality.
The opening 16 verses of Surah Al-Rum are not a fortune teller's trick meant to dazzle a tribal audience. They are a masterclass in reading history as a law-governed system.
Which brings this entirely theoretical deep dive right back to your doorstep. We are asking you, the listener, to do an audit today. Look at the systems you are a part of right now. Look at your company. Look at your local community organization. Look at your local government or your national politics. Ask yourself, are these systems operating on Zahir? Are they just chasing short-term surface metrics? Are they inflating the stock price or the polling numbers while the foundation quietly rots?
Or are they operating on a Hira? Are they building sustainable, structurally sound foundations that will survive the next stress test?
Or are they creating Nahamwarian, the systemic inequalities that turn wealth into the very water that will eventually sink the boat? Are the leaders cutting the fruit from your branch and calling it a fair wage?
It requires a brutal, honest assessment of the world around you, stripping away your own tribal loyalties just like the Meccans had to do.
And we will leave you with this final, chilling systems engineering question to ponder over your coffee. We know from the autopsy of past mega-civilizations that a collapse is always preceded by the corruption of a society's own internal accounting system. A system falls when it denies the reality of what it is actually producing and attributes its success to the wrong causes, whether that's idols, strongmen, or just blind luck. So look around your world. What is the first red flag that your system's accounting has been fundamentally corrupted? Because here's the immutable law of history. When the leaders start taking credit for the rain, how long until the crops actually fail?